ancient and modern, I come across this theme. They are terrified of the game being exposed, because not least on the basis of resources alone, the moon has no resources. So when it targets a planet, it feeds off the planet. So, you know, when I'm kind of looking at this now, and when I think about the translations, at least alleged translations, I always keep an open mind, of the Sumerian tablets, where it talks about the Anunnaki coming and mining for gold, and creating a slave race to mine for gold.
The properties of gold are to be able to connect consciousness to the all that is. That is one of the classic descriptions, is it has that property, which is interesting when you're looking at this whole game of consciousness, that as you detail it. And one of the things I just wanted to just underscore a couple of these from indigenous cultures. You write about Mutwa saying, Credo Mutwa saying that in their lore it was known that you should never upset the moon, because the moon is vengeful and can do bad things, where the sun is not.
Another interesting thing, which I think is, when we get to the moon matrix, very, very significant, is he was telling me that before the moon came, the sun was perceived as female. I think they used to call it Langa, the desired one. And then when the moon came, because they said there's African tribes that say, you know, we go back to before the moon came, that switched, and they started perceiving the sun as male and the moon as female. And that, for me, is symbolic, perhaps more than symbolic, of this switch of consciousness that happened when the moon came. The matrix, as I call it, has hacked into the information construct of this part of the universe, and therefore we're like living in a tiny virtual reality within the wider virtual reality. And when you look at the frequency range that we can access, compared with what even mainstream science says exists in this universe in terms of matter, mass, dark energy, dark matter, all this stuff, it is so tiny, it's unbelievable.
I do want to talk about Carl Jung very briefly, because one of the great things about Egyptian wisdom that was lost to us was the great teaching of Egyptian wisdom was that the most important relationship that you could develop was the relationship with your divine Ka, your higher self. And that was brought back to us in the 20th century by Carl Jung, who spent his life absolutely scared shitless that anybody would find out that he had this relationship with this consciousness that he referred to as Philemon. And this is actually Carl Jung's own drawings of Philemon. And he recognized that Philemon was his higher self. And it is Jung's wisdom that has helped us to understand that Egyptian mystery school teaching and the relationship, the importance of the relationship with the higher self, because the higher self is effectively the interface that we have with all the other realms. It works on the same basis as the sort of Houston space trips. When the astronauts are up in space, there are all these people, all these technicians who all want to sort of get their word in with the astronauts. So rather than having them all chattering away, there is one guy, and everything has to come through one guy, and he decides the priorities. And that basically is the way the higher self can work. Now, Hypatia was the chief scientist at that time, and she was brutally murdered. And the reason she was murdered was because she was seen as a threat to the New World Order. The New World Order being the Orthodox Christian Church. And one of the things that I have certainly uncovered in my research, and I appreciate this may be controversial, but it's my research, so I'm going to tell you, there is absolutely nothing Christian about the Roman Church. There are many Christians in the Roman Church. There's no question about that. There are many good Christians in the Roman Church, but there is nothing fundamentally Christian about the Roman Church. Now, the Roman Church set about destroying the ancient wisdom, making sure that it could not be accessed. From the time that the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, we lost the ability to read the hieroglyphs.
And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. This is the true spiritual point of awakening, supposedly achieved by such avatars as Moses and Buddha alike. So, in this explanation, and all could indeed be valid, we have Moses connecting to his inner self, the inner sun or light of the sun. He is doing this via the law of chaos and creation, the wisdom of Thoth, and emerging as the enlightened one with shining horns and illuminated countenance. Only by connecting in this way will we know the path ahead, and we will be able to lead it. Is also the place where Jeremiah supposedly buried the ark. In attempting to try and locate the real Mount Sinai, we are of course attempting to find something that may never in fact have existed, or the wilderness of the moon god Sin or Thoth. Let's just have a look at Exodus for a clue. In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, for they were departed from Rephidim, and were come to the desert of Sinai. It is the twilight zone in the land of the moon god, and only here could they contact their god. Of course, the moon god is important, because it is lit by the light of the sun. So I decided it was time to take a look at the word sin, to see if there could be any clue in the name. The word does in fact come from the root Syriac, meaning to shine, and comes to us as sin via the Babylonian Sinu, for the moon. This shining aspect also comes through in the fact that the desert of Sin was so named because of its glare from the white chalk. It seems then that the moon is named Sin because it shines by the light of the sun. This was also made upon the earth as a connection to the light of the sun, which was still seen to be alive, even in night. So too, even in darkness, we ourselves may shine, so say the Gnostics. Firstly, and most simply, it is pure propaganda. The Greeks and Romans were in the land of the Israelites during these periods, and the Israelites, especially the Pharisees, of which the writer of 2 Maccabees was one, were against these intrusions. We find at this time that the Essene and others escape or migrate to Damascus, to the region known as Haran, and remain in exile while they develop their new covenant ideas, and begin the Jesus fable. The one individual these groups look up to is called the true teacher or lawgiver. This is of course none other than Thoth, and is a title. This powerful individual is also none other than God himself, as it was God who gave the law to Moses on the mountain of the moon god, and the moon is of course Thoth. This is also the same Thoth who gives his name to the first part of that unlucky pharaoh, Tutankhamun, where Tut is simply Thoth. And what did archaeologists discover in the tomb of Tutankhamun but arks? Tutankhamun is the lawgiver incarnate as man, just as many before were, and many following would become. The Essene would make the greatest one of all and call him the New Covenant, Jesus. The same Jesus who we supposedly discover imaged by a great and powerful light in the Shroud of Turin. But more on this later, that it did not fall into the hands of the enemy, was safely hidden by the prophet Jeremiah, where no man would be able to find it again until the advent of the Messiah. This Messiah, of course, is now spoken of as if it were Jesus, but this assumption is a Christian one. The Messiah concept was much older and much more widespread than early Christianity. The Messiah was a man of light, a vision of true mysticism called by Daniel in the book of Daniel, the Son of Man, us. Indeed, Gnostics simply believed that Jesus was an ordinary man within whom the Messiah, or Christ, had emerged from the other world. This divinity is, or was realised, through meditation or prayer. The ark would be created to hold the sacred stones. Sinai is of course nothing different in ancient mythology to what is known as the cosmic mountain, the location which connects heaven to earth. It is the place where Moses would have indeed gone to collect the meteorite stones of the Lord from heaven. The stones, the meteorites, are the sperm, the creative principle, the law of the universe, and it is this law that was written upon the stones, not the 10 Commandments as we know them today. The 2 stones represented the superior and inferior worlds, both governed by law, seen and unseen, all in written. The ark was the carrier of God. The church looks to Mary, Ark of the New Covenant. She, like the Ark, was the repository of God's presence. Mary became the repository not simply of the tablets of the law, but of the lawgiver himself, not simply of the desert manna, but of the living bread from heaven. Hence they called her such titles as Abode of the King, Tabernacle of the Lord, Ark of Holiness, and Ark of the Covenant. She is the inmost shrine, the Holy of Holies. What we have here, clearly laid out and unopposed by the Catholic authorities, is the statement that Mary is the new Ark of the Covenant, in that she represents the exact same thing, the connection to and gateway to God. This, of course, makes Jesus the law or lawgiver. He was the tablets of stone within the ark. And this association led me now onto an amazing link with the Shroud of Turin. I had recently read Ian Wilson's excellent book, The Blood in the Shroud, where Wilson is speaking about the Edessa cloth, which he linked strongly to the Shroud of Turin. Distance, but one relic remained, the shroud itself. It has been at the centre of huge battles and been protected by the most powerful and influential people on the planet. It has undergone scientific analysis, and it is venerated by at least 1 billion Catholics. But what has it got to do with the Ark of the Covenant? I was about to discover. A quick search reveals that the shroud is referred to as the sacred Sindom, which we are told at the simplest level derives from the Greek and Latin Sindom, meaning fine sheet, cloth or winding sheet, and specifically of Middle Eastern origin. Sindom is derived from the moon god Sin. It is therefore like the moon in that it reflects the glory or light of the sun. But the most interesting form came when I stepped even further sideways and looked into medieval uses of the word Sindom. What I discovered was not only astounding, but it matched the very concepts I was developing for what the whole Ark Shroud Mary notion meant. It was to Moses that the instructions on how to build the Ark of the Covenant were given. Moses himself as a child was drawn out of a baby ark in Egypt. Well, Moses seems to have had a pretty good relationship with God. And so we find in Exodus, "And God said unto Moses, I am that I am." Am in Old English gives rise to the term to remain. In German and Sanskrit it gives rise to existence. However, God at this stage in the game, in Exodus, is still speaking in plural terms such as we are. And so I wanted to know what the plural version of am was in Old English, and was amazed to discover that it was Sindom. So the word God used for himself, or themselves, am, was in fact the same term which came to be used in Old English for the shroud, and it's still with us today. In 1988, the pressure was on to use the new scientific technique of carbon dating. The Church finally agreed to the test, and samples were distributed to the top carbon-14 dating laboratories around the globe. The whole world waited anxiously. It appeared that the flax from the linen had been harvested sometime between 1260 and 1390. The world again erupted with the new headlines, forgery. Either the Bible is right, the shroud is a copy of the story of the Bible, or the Bible was written after seeing the image in the shroud.